Now, hopefully you're not going to persuade like the bull on this screen, but being persuasive is what this is all about. And as Dr. Salter indicated, the reason why I was asked to speak with you is because I have experience. In my former life, I was a litigator. I'm an attorney by education and by practice. So a litigator is the person who goes to court. I initially did plaintiff's work, which means that I represented individuals and organizations who were suing other individuals and organizations. And I still am licensed to practice law in New Orleans. So if you get arrested during Mardi Gras, you can give me a call. Other than that, I'm not licensed in Pennsylvania, so don't bother. And then I flipped and I went to the defense side. So I was representing large corporate clients, mostly like AT&T and Delta Airlines, organizations that were being sued. And so during my experience as a litigator, that was all persuasion, right? I was trying to persuade either a jury or a judge to vote for me, to have me win. So law school doesn't prepare you all that well for that. There's one, when I was in law school, which was a gazillion years ago at Tulane, we had one class, moot court, where we kind of sort of learned how to make an effective argument. But over time, I kind of cultivated those skills. So I'm going to tell you some tools of the trade and some of the tips that I have learned along the way. I will also say that I'm an introvert by nature and I abhor public speaking. I'm not a natural. It takes a lot of energy for me to get up in front of a group of people. So it's very ironic that I became a litigator, and it's ironic that I'm a professor now. So for example, this is the third presentation I've done this week. Plus I had a 3-minute video taped of me. So from going from somebody who was so nervous to present in front of people that I would almost start crying to someone who does this all the time, it's taken a lot of practice. So I will give you some hints so you will not be as nervous when you do your presentation. Also, I am the coach currently of 2 different groups of individuals competing in case competitions. One is Penn State. I don't know if any of y'all have any affiliation with Penn State, but they have a competition for health administration. And so my students are also doing their presentations next weekend like you all are. So I have 2 groups competing in that. I had a group compete last year and they came in 2nd place. So that was pretty good. I'm also the coach of groups that compete in the Cleveland Clinic competition. Cleveland Clinic is like a UPMC. It's a big health plan organization that's in Cleveland. And the way that competition works is that students are given a case. They have a weekend to put together a executive summary and their PowerPoint. They turn it into the Cleveland Clinic. And then from all of the submissions from all over the country, the Cleveland Clinic selects 16 teams to come to the Cleveland Clinic and actually present. And by golly, one of my teams was one of the 16 teams that got to go to the Cleveland Clinic. It was terribly exciting. So I think that between these experiences, I must have learned something along the way to share with you. So someone tell me where you are in preparing for your competition. Does somebody mind unmuting and letting me know? Are you still developing your strategy? Are you writing your 1-page brief? What are you all doing right now? Please don't make me guess.
I don't know about other teams, but for my team, I know we're kind of at the stage where we've already divvied up the sections of our presentation to different members of the group. We've all done our individual research, and now we're just kind of trying to organize it all into a PowerPoint and discuss how we're going to present, just the logistics of presenting.
Could you tell me what your name is, please?
Naomi.
Hey, Naomi. So how many people are in your group?
There are 5 of us in the group.
And how did you decide who was going to do what?
I think we all, so we picked, each of us picked a topic that we were most interested in. So we kind of divided it up into healthcare delivery, infrastructure, surveillance, and a couple of other different topics. And each of us took a topic and researched as much as possible. And then we're going to kind of combine it all into one presentation.
And how long how long is the entire presentation?
I think it has to be 15 minutes.
And so if there are 5 of you, y'all will get to speak for about 3-ish?
I think so, yeah.
Have you thought about your transitions?
We haven't gotten that far. I think, so we meet on Sundays. And actually, I think we're going to meet today after this as well. So I think that's actually one of the things we're going to discuss. I know I was looking to this presentation, looking forward to this presentation because I figured it would give us a lot to talk about.
Oh, good. Well, thank you, Naomi. One other question. Are you all competing in person or are you competing virtually?
Via Zoom.
Okay, so there are additional, I'm so glad you told me that modality because obviously there are different strategies to use when your head's this big, right? As opposed to when it is 5'9" like I am in person. So, okay, great. The rest of you all, are you about, you can just nod yes or no, are you about in the same boat as Naomi in terms of where you are in your preparing? Is anybody not? Okay, so I don't see anybody saying no. So I will make the assumption that you all are about in the same place, okay? Thank you very much, Naomi. I appreciate that. So it's my understanding from looking at what you all have done, you're doing an oral presentation with supporting slides and a budget brief. Is that right? Yeah, okay, good. So for your slides, and this is for anybody, what template are you using? You know, what have you talked about what your slides are going to look like? What format will they be in? So I'll tell you what my format is. When I started pulling together this presentation a couple of days ago, my computer has a thing on, if I'm in PowerPoint, I can hit design ideas and it will come up with stuff like this, which I think looks really nice. But how are you all approaching putting together your actual slides? Are you using PowerPoint? Yeah. Do you have one person in charge of, I think there's a question maybe. I think, somebody's using Google Slides. I don't even know what Google Slides are. But thank you for contributing. Is one person putting together or are you each doing your own? How are you going to make it look like one team? Have you thought of that? Oh, I think someone's speaking but is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Hey, yeah, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
For our team, we're using Google Slides, which allows everyone to contribute to it so everyone can work on it at the same time. So right now we put all our information basically on the slides and then we can probably choose the design template at a later point and make sure it's like uniform throughout, but everyone can contribute to it.
Because that's really important because even though you have five authors, you need one editor, one person to make sure that the style looks the same, the fonts are the same, or if you choose to use different fonts that it's deliberate. You know, you don't want one font on one page and then the next font that it doesn't make sense. You want to make sure your colors, whatever color scheme you all go with, that's uniform. You don't want to do anything that's going to distract the judges from what you are saying and your point. And if they're looking at your slide and it's too busy, there's too much going on, it doesn't look right, it doesn't look attractive, they're going to be focused on that instead of on your great presentation. So make sure that one person, I would suggest that you charge one person on your team to have final editing responsibility for your slide deck. Okay, moving on. Okay, so here are some of the presentation skills, particularly with respect to case competitions, that I have found to be helpful. My Cleveland Clinic team that went to the Cleveland Clinic got dinged on this first one because they didn't introduce themselves and the team. They just made the assumption basically that the judges, and I was supportive of this was my fault too, made the assumption that the judges knew who they were, knew they said their team name, but they didn't say, and my name is Elizabeth Van Nostrand. These are my teammates, Cynthia Salter, blah, blah, blah. So you might want to do that since they got counted down for that. So introduce yourself and your team. So designate one person to do that.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
For this case, would it be simply just name? Would it be undergraduate, graduate student, major, or just name?
I would just do names because you only have 15 minutes.
Okay.
5 speakers, and you don't want to take 45 seconds to do that. Okay. Unless it's relevant, and I'm not sensing that it is relevant.
No.
Just, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Elizabeth Van Nostrand. These are my teammates, blah, 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 and we are team hit, or whatever. It's not team, but you know what I mean. And then launch into it. And it's probably the best to have whoever is going to speak first to do that, to do the introduction. So there's no pause, because it seems like this is a very time sensitive competition. You want to use your time very wisely. Any other questions on introduction? As I said, don't be shy about asking questions, because that's why I'm here. Okay, so the next one, look each judge in the eye. Now you're going to be remote like this, right? And you might have noticed I have notes down to my left, and I keep looking down to my left. You want to do that as least frequently as possible. Perhaps you should put your notes someplace else. Now they're right in back of my computer. And so when I'm looking up at them, I'm also looking this way. You're going to have to see where your camera is on your computer, because sometimes it's at the bottom, sometimes it's at the top. So you want to make sure it's poised where you do not have a lot of distractions in back of you, that you don't have like halos over your head. It's a whole different ballgame doing this Zoom thing. I'll tell you, it really is. You won't look at each square. Like I try to look at each of you at different times. I don't know if you can tell I'm looking at you, but I try to focus on different people throughout. So try to do that best you can to the judges. Now, are the judges going to be saving their questions until the end, as opposed to asking them intermittently?
We thought we would save them till the end of each presentation.
That's probably good, I think, for this group, because it's in a moot court. I also have coached teams in the law school doing moot court competitions, and in those, the judges actually stop and ask questions intermittently. And so that's a whole different skill set, being on target, conveying your message, and then all of a sudden getting sometimes a hostile question from a judge. So this is good. So you'll at least be able to get through your presentation before you're called on. Try not to fidget like I just did. I just took off my sweater because it's warm in here and I was getting hot. Try not to fidget. Try not to play with your hair. But by the same token, don't be wooden. This is not a very engaging way to present. If you have your hands folded like this and you're just talking straight like a tin man, be yourself. That is, if I had one thing to impart to you, that would be the biggest thing. Be yourself when you're presenting. The very first time I did a presentation was when I started, besides being a lawyer, and when I did presentations as a lawyer, I always felt like I was acting, I was acting the role of a lawyer. But the first time I did a presentation at Pitt, I would say if I were grading myself on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being great, I was probably about a 3. My mouth was dry. I was clacking. I was visibly shaking. And the reason why was because I was trying to present like my boss presented, because she got sick and asked me to step in at the last minute. So instead of being Elizabeth Van Nostrand, I was Pat Sweeney, and I was a failure. If you talk with your hands like I do, it's okay to talk with your hands during your presentation. It shows passion. It shows that you really, are believing what you're talking in. You can use them for emphasis. I'm not talking about going like this and being distracting, but if you want to make a point, you can make a point with your hands. Use your voice to make points. You don't have to be monochromatic. You don't have to speak in one tone. If there's something that you're passionate about in your presentation, it's okay to get a little louder when you talk about it. Try not to memorize what you're going to say. And that's important because, number one, I don't know if you've ever heard somebody who's memorized something, but it often comes off as sing-songy like this because they have a pitch that goes up and then it goes back down, and then it goes up and then it goes back down. That's not what you want. Another problem with trying to memorize is if you forget a word, you're going to go berserko, because you're so set to a script that if you deviate from it, it's going to be upsetting. So use bullet points instead of sentences. Don't have entire sentences, have a clause. So, okay, I know I'm supposed to talk about, I have not yet memorized, I've not memorized what you all were talking about, but let's say I'm talking about this, this presentation. Each one of these is a bullet, right? I don't have full sentences written on my notes, what I'm going to say about each of these bullets. These are to remind me of topics, not a script. So don't be so scripted that it's going to throw you if you use a different word. And P.S., your audience doesn't know if you forget something. They don't know if you left out that sentence. So if you do, don't sweat it, because they're not going to know. They're going to know if you go like this. They're going to realize that something's amiss. But if you just forget something, keep going. Keep going. If you can circle back to it at some logical point, do it. Okay, breathe. That is, if you feel yourself getting choked up like I did the first time I presented and I said my mouth was clacking, I could physically feel my chest starting to tighten like this. If you feel like that's happening to you, take a moment and just inhale, exhale, and then keep going. It will calm you down. If you feel like you're getting revved up, take a moment, because it's literally like 3 seconds. It's not going to interrupt. It's not going to distract, and it will help you maintain your composure. Dress for success. What do you think I mean by that? It's a cliche. Well, there's different dress that's appropriate for different things, right? Before 1:30, I had on today a sweatshirt. You don't want to know what I have on below my waist right now, but I had a sweatshirt on. That was not an appropriate attire, in my opinion, for me to give this presentation. So I changed. You don't have to overdress, but for better or for worse, people do judge you on your attire, your appearance. So whatever, I'm guessing, and Dr. Salter, correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect you all will be having something like business casual, like a nice blouse, or I don't know if the boys would wear collared shirts. This is my guess. What would you suggest, Dr. Salter, for this sort of competition? Whoop, you're
Let me
muted.
get myself unmuted. Yes, I was trying to be muted. We hadn't really talked about it, and I do think Zoom changes everything. Certainly, if we were all in person, obviously, I think most people would be thinking a little bit more about this. I think that it's important to consider that. I think the suggestions you gave are excellent. I wouldn't want somebody to feel completely discouraged if they were that they couldn't attend, if they weren't able to get that together in time. I don't know where everybody is and where they will be at the time, but yes, I do think it's important to think about that and to think about what they're wearing. What you suggested is absolutely appropriate. I think that's what I certainly have actually been seeing a lot in classes and other events that I've had students in. So yeah, I think that's appropriate. Elaine?
I have a question. Oh, am I unmuted? Yes, I'm unmuted. What about the background? Like, I see that we all have, many times I have a certain background and I took it off today. Should the teams have like a unified background if they can create that?
I don't know if that's necessary, but I would suggest that it not be a distracting background.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like,
Yeah. I agree. And I think a lot of those produced backgrounds, they burn up a lot of battery power and bandwidth. And so not everybody, depending on where you are and what your Wi-Fi, as somebody who just came off a terrible Wi-Fi connection the last 2 weeks of my life and having to upgrade my service, we don't want people to have to overextend their Wi-Fi or their devices if that's not an option. But yeah, something that's not too distracting. I think most people have been, I'm just trying to look around the group now.
well, this is what I would really say. Good. Listen, this is what I would say. I teach at my freshman programs class. I've had roommates walking back and forth in the background. Mm-hmm. And that is something I would really encourage you to avoid. Yeah. Ask your roommate not to come into the room while you're presenting. Yeah, I've been kind of shocked what I've seen.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, I think the fact that this is a timed presentation and you really want to try to minimize your distractions, things that would slow you down or take away from your presentation. Whereas when you're in class and you're not necessarily the focus of the attention, but for those minutes while you're presenting, right? And it's not a big chunk of the afternoon. The rest of the afternoon, you will be a participant in a small box, that it won't be nearly as important. But for that brief time while your team is right front and center, that's when I would say it's important to, to minimize the distractions, really make it sort of a no-fly zone for the other people that you share your space with. Because it's a big deal. I agree.
Yeah, and getting back to dress, it doesn't have to be fancy, but again, don't be you don't want people really looking at what you're wearing, right? So you don't want to wear like a t-shirt that has all sorts of letters on it. Something plain and simple, just like your background, just like your slides, and we'll get to that in a second, because you want them focusing on you, not on what's going around you. But by the same token, we know that mistakes are made. We're dealing with this virtual weirdo world that we're living in. And if your roommate does happen to walk in back of you, blow it off. Don't let it rattle you. Okay. Just keep laser focused on your mission. And do have that conversation with your roommate though. beforehand, or your dogs. Like I'm waiting for my dogs to start barking at any second. We're lucky so far.
Cats have been, we've seen more cats during Zoom, right?
Yes. Yep. Here's a real tip about background. So you were saying what should be in your background. I really did have to record myself for a 3-minute video. There's the American Public Health Association annual meeting that's coming up. And in one of my roles, I was asked to do a 3-minute video of myself, which took like 25 takes because I kept messing up. But in one of them, I realized in back of me, I was at not this house, but a different house. And on my mantle, there's a big sign that says wine, W-I-N-E. I thought perhaps that was not the best background to have at a public health conference. So of course I took that down. So just be aware of what's in back of you. Any questions about presenting, how you can calm yourself down if you start feeling like a runaway train, how not to memorize, but practice, because you want to feel confident when you go in. I'm a much better professor now than I was 5 years ago, because I have now taught kind of sort of the same thing. And I feel much better myself about it. So rehearse in a mirror, look in a mirror. You know, Zoom is good and bad because you see yourself, right? Usually when you stand up and present, you're not looking at you, but here you are. So you can practice the lighting, you can practice your gestures, you can practice your tone. You can record on Zoom and listen to yourself and critique yourself before the actual competition. So let's talk just briefly about transitions. So this is something I'm really working with, and I guess I can transition to the next slide. This is something I'm really working with my team right now, my Penn State team that's competing next weekend. Actually, I have 2 teams, because it's one thing to transition when you're all in the same space, and it's another thing to transition when you're in different locations. You have to make a decision if one person is going to advance all the slides or if everybody is going to advance their own slides. There are pluses and minuses to both of those options. If one person controls the slides, it goes more smoothly because you're not stopping, sharing screens or whatever. The downside is that person might not have the cues they need to advance the slide without you saying, next slide, please. And even though that's okay, it's a little bit tedious, 15 minutes of hearing next slide, please, next slide, please. So if one person is going to control the slides, there should be like a not a script per se, but you should coordinate what the next slide phrase is going to be. For example, let's say we're on here, and Dr. Salters forwarded my slides. Our little catchphrase might be, all right, so now let's talk a little bit about slides. So she knows what my trigger is to advance the slides. So that's just something you're going to have to work out amongst yourself. But the more smoothly you all can do these transitions, the better. Because again, the whole point of your presentation is not only to convey your message, but to do it in a way that's not distracting. Okay, so slides. I have more words on these slides than I do on my slides that in my class. I have very few words on my slides. That's mostly because I want my class to be paying attention to me. If I just put everything I was going to say on slides, we wouldn't need a class. I would just say, here is a slide deck. See you next week. So make sure your slides are attractive. Make sure that they aren't busy. be cognizant of white space. White space is your friend, okay? You don't want it to be so congested that you can't see the forest for the trees. That's another trite expression, but you want to be able to see your points. Lead off with your punchline. You know, you're coming up with a solution, you're coming up with a recommendation, you're coming up with an answer. I would suggest you might want to start with that. We are here to tell you, boom. And then you can talk about all your background stuff, how you got there. One thing that I would suggest you do is after you come up with whatever your solution or answer or bottom line is, also think about the stuff you decided not to go with and talk about that during your presentation. We considered doing X, Y, and Z. However, because it was not cost effective, because it was not doable within the time period of 5 years or whatever reason, we discounted it. So not only be strong with the recommendations you're going to make, but also describe those that you didn't go with and why. Use visuals and maps, graphs, charts. You know, everything doesn't have to be in words. There's a lot of different ways to present the same data. So, you know, you can put your data in a table. You can put your data in a bar graph or a pie chart or a line graph, all different ways, a heat map. There's so many different ways, a map. There are many different ways to convey the same information and mix it up. Don't do the same thing on every single slide. I would suggest if your competition lends itself, use some sort of timeline for your rollout. You know, this is what we're going to do, and this is the time period that we're going to do it. And literally make a timeline showing after 6 months, here's the benchmark after a year, this is the benchmark after 18 months, etc. Because that's easy for someone to understand. Be consistent, we talked about that. You want all your slides to look basically, I just said don't make them the same. I meant the content, but you want the structure of your slides to look the same. For the data that you can't put, you don't have room to put, you don't have time to explain. I don't know if in this competition it's allowable, but if it is, put it in an appendix. So what do I mean? I mean, have your presentation slides 1 through 15, for example. And then after you have your thank you slide, you have additional slides following it that explains how you did your budget, how you determine costs, how, you know, the backup information. So if you get a question during the question and answer, you can flip to your appendix slide and say, this slide represents how we determine the price per square foot for the hospital or whatever data you are presenting. So you can put stuff in an appendix that you don't have room for necessarily in the front part. Speaking of questions, so when you're done and the judges start asking you questions, you all have to rise to the occasion. You can't just designate one person as the answer person. It's okay too if one person starts giving an answer and you have something to supplement it. You can not interrupt your colleague, but you can, after your colleague is finished, and say, and in addition to what Dr. Salter said, we also considered blah, blah, blah. So it's a real joint effort, and teams do get dinged if only one person or 2 people out of 5 do all of the answering for the questions and answers. Now I need to take a breath. There are questions in the chat, I think. I don't know if I think they're not to me. Okay, so that's all the prepared materials that I had. Do you have any specific questions? Either or general questions that I could help answer?
While people are thinking of their questions, I really do want to just emphasize what you had said about preparing, because I also am an introvert who ended up doing a lot of public speaking, and preparation is the best antidote for nerves, right? When you know something so well and you know what you want to say, and even if you get interrupted or something happens, that you can come back to it. It really is one of the best preparations. So I had wanted to emphasize that at the time, but I didn't want to interrupt. Anyway, so I will let it go back to questions. Maybe people have formulated their thoughts now for some questions.
Yeah. Plus, the better you know your material, the better you'll be able to answer the questions that you get, and they won't like freak you out.
So there's a question in the chat about, can you see it? Yeah, about the general background and overview.
Let's see. Let's see. Oh, here's hi. Okay, can everybody see that? Oh, hi, Fariel. How are you? For this case competition, do you think it's important to give a general overview of the background on the country or jump straight into the case? That's a really good question. So will your judges, are there any assumptions for the judges?
I was reading it today, and that the judges are government officials and from an NGO in Liberia. Here, I'm going to read it. I'm going to find that.
That's a great idea to go over that, right? That's
yeah.
Excellent question and excellent, right. What are the assumptions of the case? Because it's not, you are all not students at the Graduate School of Public Health, and the people who are the judges are not automatically professors at the university. They're playing a role also, right? So go ahead and read that.
Yeah, I gotta find it if somebody wants to. It'll come.
That makes a big difference, because, for example, when the students are presenting either at the Penn State competition or at the Cleveland Clinic, they are really presenting to hospital administrators from Geisinger, which is the hospital system in the middle of Pennsylvania, like the UPMC, and Cleveland Clinic. So obviously, they don't have to go over the mission statement of these organizations because the people know. So that's but I'm not sure about this competition.
I'm pulling it up as well. I'm pretty sure I remember.
Okay, here it says, this is on page 14. The Liberian government and their NGO partner are looking forward to hearing your proposals and taking action to strengthen Liberia's health system for the benefit of all Liberians. They are excited to see the results of your passion, skills, creativity, and appreciate your dedication and thoughtfulness. So the Liberian government and their NGO partner.
So I would give, I would, if I were doing it, I would give some stats that were supportive of my position. Rather than say, like, Liberia is a country of X number of people, but if there's something peculiar, unique about a population that you're going to be speaking of, like, I'm not sure, but like 13% of Liberia's population is under the age of 25, and this impacts our decision making, because something like that would be good. That's a good use of a stat. Don't just throw out statistics to throw them out, but if they have some relevance to your point, if they're supportive, or if they're contrary to your point. But you say, although only 18% of Liberia's population is under the age of 25, when you look at the medical expenses associated therewith, it's disproportionate to that number, or something like that. I like statistics. because it gives credibility to your solution. Too many numbers on a slide is overwhelming, and that's where your creativity comes into play. You don't want it to have extraneous stats and numbers. You can have that stuff in the appendix if you have to go to it. But use them judiciously, but use them to support your opinion. I love stats, even though I'm a lawyer. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you, Feriel. Any other questions, comments? Y'all are gonna rock this competition, right? I know it. I know it. Any other questions, comments? I know I just kind of spouted off, what's the word? Stuff like that, but hopefully those are tips that can be helpful to you. Dr. Salter, is there anything else you need from me? Oh, I think you're muted.
I have a lot of noise going on here, so I'm trying to be very conscientious to mute myself for the in-between time, but then I keep assuming I'm not muted. I was just asking or thinking to myself and checking with Elaine, and I maybe want to ask the groups if they would like an opportunity to go into a breakout room with their group to see if they have any additional questions while we have you here. I mean, it would take us a few minutes to get that set up. And I think that if you would be willing to stay while they take a few minutes to do that, would that be okay? And then if they have questions, they come back to the main room. Oh, now you're muted. You did the same thing I did, trying to.
The problem is I'm on a Mac and sometimes it's hard to find my arrow. No, that would be fine. If that would be helpful for you students, I'm more than happy to just
think? Give me a thumbs up or something in the chat, or if people are interested in doing that. It'll take us a few minutes to get the breakout room set up with your groups, but that way you could sort of check in with your own group, see what you got, what you got from this talk that you want to apply to your own situation, and then if you have questions. Does that seem like something that would be useful for people?
Or if they're, or if they're chatting
to
one another right now, what do you guys think? Let us know, because
yeah, that's a good point. I always forget about the private chat mode. Sometimes it's shut off in some meetings, but yes, you could all be talking and we don't know it. But I just want you to be able to use this time. And while we have Dr. Van Nostrand here, to be able to, give you an opportunity to ask your questions and get those answers.
I was going to say Liz is also on the line or on in the meeting. If she had any, wanted to highlight anything that Professor Van Nostrand had said or emphasized, a piece that worked for them when they presented.
No, it's all good. I have a dog too, so I've been constantly muting all week because of that. Not too much to emphasize. I would just remember based on the question that was asked, that you have a limited amount of time. So just make sure you don't spend too much time on the background of the country, and concentrate on the sections of the background that are important to your presentation. Just because if you get too bogged down with backgrounds, you won't have enough time to really hone in on your point. So that would be the only thing I'd be careful with that. And then I was also going to say, if any of you want to go over your presentation as a group one-on-one, feel free to. I think you guys have been given my email. You can feel free to email me and we can try and set up a time this week. If you have if you want to go through some of your slides or just ask about anything sort of specific to your presentation. I mean, Dr. Van Nostrand did a really wonderful job of everything, I think, with a general overview. And then it's just more if your topic has some specific points you want to kind of get some feedback on.
Thank you, Liz, for offering that you're.
There's one question in the chat. How do you handle a question that you're not so sure about? That's really tough, because when I teach and I'm asked a question by a student, I say, I don't know, if I don't know the answer, because I don't want to give the wrong answer. Or that's a great question, why don't you look into it and we'll discuss it next time, or something like that. But that's different from being in a case competition, right? You don't want to stand there and say, I don't know. That's probably not the best response. So it's okay not to be certain about it, but I would try to come up with something in my brain that is at least tangential to the question that was asked, and deliver it with some sort of confidence. That's what I would do. Dr. Salter, I don't know if you have another.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's also important in those moments to remember you're on a team.
Yep.
Right? Just because you don't know doesn't mean no, and you can say, that's a great question. You can look to your, well, no, you can't look to your team because you're all little boxes on the square. You can say, I'm trying to think of what a good introduction would be to say, that's a great question. I'd like to give a member of my team to answer, the opportunity to answer. If nobody's speaking up, you can probably kind of guess that nobody knows. So I would think about having somebody who is going to take a little bit of a leadership position for the unknown questions. And it may be obvious who should do that, right? If it's about a particular section that person you ask, there's a question comes about my section and I don't specifically know it, I would say, that's a great question. I'd like to see if my team would like to contribute to that as well. And then if nobody has anything to say, I would, as you said, try to address it as best I could, saying I may not be able to give you a definitive answer on that, or here's what seems to address your question to me. Yeah, that's a really tough thing, right? Something that you can't know. I mean, I think that it's important to acknowledge that you don't have a definitive answer, although you, like, as you said, you don't want to just say, oh, I don't know that. I think demonstrating some thoughtfulness is important, right? Rather than just saying something, you can't make something up. Keep in mind, everybody else is reading all the same stuff. You can't just take a guess at it.
This is just spitballing, right? You know how the president always comes, or a public speaker, if you have a point that you want to come across, you might have 5 points. Do you kind of bring it back to one of your points and emphasize why that point is valid, if it's relevant?
Yeah, that was kind of what I was going to say, is I would practice pivoting.
Yeah.
So if you get asked a question that you're not so sure about, feel free to just be like, you know what, that's a really good point. However, we chose to focus on this idea because we felt it was more relevant based on this research that we found. So get good at sort of you see this a lot in political debates, but get good at the redirection, or practice that a little bit together, where you need to be able to, you don't need to know everything, but defend why you know the things you do. So that if you get asked something you don't know, you can be like, you know what, that's a great thing to consider. However, we felt like this was more relevant based on, and that way you can be like, yeah, I don't necessarily know. You don't really have to say, I don't know, or make it seem like you didn't consider it. You can kind of be like, this was more important to our plan or to the cultural relevant. Like, you have a reason to say why what your focus was your focus. And sometimes you can kind of get away with not knowing everything because of that.
I think that's a great strategy. And you can even say, we thought about that. But we decided to go with this for X, Y, and Z. Knowledge, that's an important factor. Oh, absolutely. But and don't let it.
Thank you. From the team, right?
So much for asking. Yeah, and help your teammates. Help them. You know, if you see someone struggling, jump in, because it's a team.
What I see is really important is that the team, the individual practices, but that the team practices, so there's this smooth overall presentation. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I guess it sort of gets to that question about background, right? Because you don't want to spend too much time on it because your time is very precious and you really want to use it as efficiently as possible, right? It's not a whole lot of time to present something, you know, to present something like this. And so you, right, the fact that everybody is going to be talking about the same country and the same problem, you don't need to go into all of those details. And so I think that and smoothing your transitions, right? Smoothing your transitions, and then each individual member really smoothing out their talk time, their presentation time is key.
And use and abuse your appendix. That is really, the appendix is really for that question and answer period. Because especially for background, you don't have to talk about it as much in your presentation, but if you get a question that's like, well, why didn't you consider education? You can pull it up in your appendix and potentially be like, no, we did, and here's this data. So having an appendix, just keep in mind, you don't need to use all the appendix slides, but it helps a lot because sometimes that way you don't have to remember everything. You have a visual reference that you can pull up if you're asked a question. So that's something. When we did our presentation last year at Emory, I think we had like 12 slides for the actual presentation. And then we had, I think, honestly, we might have had like 15 or 20 slides in our appendix because we weren't sure what we were going to get asked. And we wanted to make it clear that we had everything thought out. You just don't have the time to talk. You don't have the time to explain every single point for like why you came to certain conclusions. So appendixes are like, they're honestly kind of a gift because you don't have to remember things. And then assign who will talk about the slides. So if something gets brought up, if you have kind of a general idea of what topics might, like spitball what topics might come up in your questions, it'd be like, okay, Kate's going to talk about this point and this point. And so if a questions get asked, you know exactly who theoretically should answer. And that might not help with all the questions, but it'll get your responses at least a little bit quicker. And then people can jump in if there's like overlapping topics.
It's been my experience that the judges ask a lot of questions about finances and how budgets and how did you come up with that figure. I don't know if it's true in this competition, but it certainly was the case in Cleveland Clinic, out the wazoo, and also the Penn State.
For Emory, it was definitely, yeah, you had to have a budget and you had to be able to explain your budget. We had really good budget slides for that. And then what we did is in the appendix, we had more detailed budget slides. And that's definitely one of those things. I don't know, Elaine, how much they're focused on that for this presentation from a scoring perspective. Because I don't think you guys were given a budget cap. But for the Emory one, for example, my country was given like, you had like $5 million. So your plan had to be able to be feasible with like that amount of money, which can be really hard to explain. You need to know how much things cost.
Any other questions?
To remind students that the judging rubric is there on page 15. So it's all pretty transparent. I think thank you.
You're
Cynthia,
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So let's see. Oh, okay. Liz is offering her email again. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
And knowing this talented woman is here at the University of Pittsburgh. And even, I'm an undergraduate and graduate advisor in my certificate program, And I love for students to meet people with these very interesting careers that can pivot so many different ways through public health and through law. So, you know, students, particularly my undergraduate students, think of this, what she said she does, what she's, you know, the different paths she's taken to lead her here. It's very interesting.
So if anybody has any interest in health policy and management and or law, please reach out to me. There's my contact information. Best of luck to each and every one of you. As I say, you're going to rock it. You're going to hit it out of the ballpark. And if you don't, like I tell my competitors, if you don't, no biggie. You're doing this for a good time, right? So don't get stressed out about it. I'm sure you'll do fine, but if you don't, it's on to the next event. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for your attention. Thank you for inviting me, and have a great weekend.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So it's everyone can do this and you will have fun. Really, it's a learning experience to have fun. So thanks again. This was a great session.
Oh, that was outstanding, if I say so myself.